Somebody asked me about my video, The Pride, that I made yesterday. Thanks for watching that. I'm going to talk today a little bit about levels and recording and how I get the mix on the computer. It's a kind of a bit of a sort of dark art, this. Essentially, what I try to start with when I've recorded everything is to put everything into, just bring faders up without any effects. So you can see on the computer screen here, I've got all my effects that I used yesterday on all my channels, but they're all bypassed. So this is essentially the mix. So everything is dry at the moment. Now, what a good starting place I find, and at any rate, is to start with the drums and the bass and see if the bass guitar and the kick drum occupy a good sort of level in the mix in terms of where their bass frequencies are. So if I reinstate the compressor on that bass and the EQ on the bass and the drums, hopefully they should be sort of roughly equal powers. Apart from that little slap bass bit there. So what's happening at the moment is that the output of the computer, which is over here, is being slapped out of existence by the compression and the sort of raised levels of the bass and the drums. Now the bass and the drums are by far the loudest things in the mix because all of the energy in a sound wave is in the bass end anyway. So I've got at the moment a 3.5 dB clip on my output. Now this is the problem with digital audio workstations. When we worked with tape and mixing desks, it was clear cut. They had physical circuits that could handle certain levels above which there would be distortion. On the computer, because everything's in the digital domain, it's harder to see or harder to sort of recognise those problems when they occur. Now, what I've got here is a multi-band compressor and a limiter on the output, but what I'm going to do first is just to take that output level down. In fact, I only need to take it down 6 dB maybe, just for a comfortable sort of level sort of headroom. I quite like with my bass to have it quite dry. I've got flat wound strings on my Fender Precision that I used for this, so there's not much top end there. So the next track in, I put some guitars and some keys. Now, when I record guitar, for convenience, I tend to just use the guitar processors that are built into the computer rather than going to the trouble of miking an amp. Of course, you know, there are purists out there who rightly say, well, you should have a guitar amp because it really does form part of your sound, and that's absolutely fine. I just decided to put it through here. So here's the guitar, the electric guitar, and I put a phaser on it. And there's another guitar here, I think. So there's guitar chords and there's like a single line guitar. So the classic case is, you know, if you pick up the pieces by the average white band through a stereo system, you take one channel away, you can hear the rhythm guitar on one side and the single line on the other. And they're mixed in such a way that you don't lose any audio level on the left and right channels. Okay, so that's my sort of initial sort of sounds. Now, there is an extra guitar there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the drums and the bass away, just leaving the two guitars. With that Yamaha YC keyboard, that beast of 70s loveliness. Now, once you've got your sort of the bed down of your low frequencies and your chords, then you can start slotting in all the sort of rhythms and everything else. So what I've also neglected to do here, and it's a very good idea, I was kind of not in a hurry to do this, but I did it all in a day. But I should have named my tracks before I'd started, just tapped in bass guitar or organ or drums or whatever, just to make it easier to find your tracks. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take the drums away for the moment, just so that I can hear what else is going on. So if there are any problem areas there, so I'm just going to take the guitars and the bass away with that keyboard and just listen very briefly to what came before. It's the pride. And I'm also going to reinstate those plugins that I had. All I've done is, with the plugins, I've just simply taken just bypassed them all to begin with, so that you can hear the sort of mix as it progresses. That you feel, it's the pride. So with the vocals, I recorded two parts, which were the sort of whispery, slightly sort of quiet. It's the pride that you feel, it's the pride. Now, although I use the pop shield, there's a little bit of bass there in the mix. Now, this is this channel here and this channel. These, in fact, it's those three that you can see, 18, 19 and 20. What I'm going to do with those is I'm going to solo those out, just so that you can hear those and hear that there's a slight popping in that bass. Pride that you feel, it's the pride. The best bet, and this is what you should do with all your mic channels, is to try and cut everything below about 100 Hertz. So on this, I can actually drag that across to meet the other channels. If you're using an old version of Logic like I've got here, I've got a 12-year-old computer here, but it does occasionally throw up a hard disk too slow error, but I'm asking a lot of it. It's the pride that you feel, it's the pride. Now, all the bass that's gone there, this will be more apparent if you're listening on headphones. All of the bass has now been brought under control, which means that your drums and your bass guitar won't be sort of vying for space in your mix. So if I just bring everything in now. It's the pride that you feel, it's the pride. It's the pride that you... So there's my violins there. Now I want my strings. Some people put compression on strings, but I want them to be really dynamic. If there's a problem with one particular note being a bit high in level, I can just put a limiter on. But strings wise, I just want fairly plain sounds there. So here we go. There we go. I'll just put a little bit of reverb on. Notice that I've put effects on each channel. Now, this is actually unnecessary. If I want the same reverb on those three violins, I could send those three tracks to a bus onto which I can put that reverb. So that's one reason why the computer hard disk is going, oh, I can't cope. It's basically just because there is there's more of a sort of a problem getting all the data processed in time. So just looking at the, I've got some backing vocals here as well. Now, these are tracks 4 to 12. So if I just look on here, there we go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just listen to those vocals on their own. just group them as well. I'm just going to solo each one. Now, depending on the version of Logic you have or the digital audio workstation that you're using, and this works with anything that's anything like this, Cubase or FL Studio or Ableton or anything like that. It's basically a way of just controlling all the levels at once here.
Don't you know it's fascinating?
Now, what I've done there, apart from sounding like a male voice choir, is to record 3 of each part. So these 3, for example, are just the top part.
Don't you know it's fascinating?
So I've recorded 3 of each there. It just makes it so easy to mix because you've got all of this stuff that you can use. And if you want those backing vocals to really sort of be present in your stereo mix, for a start you can have them lower in the mix. And that's the effect of having things in stereo, is that you can actually start bringing levels down. I do gigs where I have a in-ear monitoring, and it's so much easier if you've just got things in stereo, because you can actually place them in the image even if they are quite low level. So assuming you've got good headphones, you can do that. So if I just solo the 3 parts out, just 3 of the parts.
Don't you know it's fascinating?
It sounds quite plain. But if I add the... Let's just take that and put all the parts back in, and you can hear how that, if you're wearing headphones, this effect will be very pronounced.
Fascinating.
So there's quite a lot more you can do with that. So just looking ahead to other things, what's on channel 2? Let's have a look. Just solo that out. Oh, I think this is my banjo. Now, in order to make that work in the stereo mix, I've put it through a reverb, which means that it sort of throws a nice stereo wash over your mix. So that's that track. The next track is my shovel bass that I put the talk box through. Now this is quite tricky to mix because the talk box is by its very nature quite a trebly thing.
When you feel the regular down, it's the ride.
So what I've done is I've actually also taken the bass off and put a compressor on so that it sits above the mix.
When you feel the regular down, it's the ride.
Now what I should have done in my haste to get this mixed was to take any silences away, because if you've got little sort of rustling, if that's on enough of the tracks, it's going to drive you around the twist. See that little bit there? So if in doubt, just cut everything when you're doing, because it really sorts out your bass end as well. And then I'm going to put a fade on the end of the first bit and the beginning of the second bit.
It's the ride.
Complete silence now.
When you feel the regular down.
I mean, there's a little bit of sort of lip smacking there, but it's an instrument. So, moving on, if I just go to the guitar solo bit here that I put down, the guitar solo which comes after the second chorus, what I've done is, I mean, this is how it sounds with no plugins. So I've just put it through there. I haven't used a guitar amp at all. I've just put it through the Logic's own distortion to try and get that sort of 70s fuzz out of it. So that's another reason for, if you wanted to get some different sounds, not to use, you know, guitar things. I mean, Prince, if you listen to guitar parts on Kiss, they're very, very plain. It's like plugged straight into a desk. And that's actually, it's really refreshing. It just brightens that guitar up a bit. So an amp, although an amp, of course, is half of a guitar, in terms of its sound, it's not always the be-all and end-all. The more compression you put on an instrument, the lower it can also be in the mix, because you are essentially taking the loud bits, squashing them down, and then you can bring everything back up. So you've got that sort of control over the mix there. Now, because I wasn't using I had a keyboard over the some of it, but I used my steel guitar. Now, pedal steel, lots of people go, well, it's country music, it's Hawaiian, or it's whatever. The answer is, it's whatever you want it to be. So I've just put chords here. It's a sound, it's as useful as a Hammond organ, actually, in your studio, where you just want this sort of washy sort of chord underneath. So it's a very nice alternative to a keyboard. So if I just put the guitar solo with that, maybe with the bass. Now, less is more, really, with lots of this. I mean, I could have tinkered with the mix a bit more just to bring other things down during that guitar solo. But there are, so for example, that Yamaha keyboard that I've just got basically playing a wah-wah sort of. I mean, if I was to basically put the drums and the bass back into context there, and also bring the steel guitar and the lead guitar in, sometimes that Yamaha might get in the way a bit. Or you can automate the level. So if I want to bring that down, I could do that and save the fader movements. On Logic, it's called latch, where you get the fader and just bring it down, and it'll remember your fader movements. So maybe if I bring it down 3 or 4 dB, it might help that guitar solo a bit. So it's playing more of a rhythmic role, really. So I could undo that, or I could go and look at my my automation. Ooh, just get my volume, current track. So this is Logic 7. So this came out in 2003, years and years and years and years and years ago. But it's a fantastic bit of kit. What I've done is I've just removed that. In fact, if I go to redo, there we go, you can see my fader movements where I brought that track down. Or you can draw a line in, you can do anything you like. So that's all of that. Now, in terms of, you can see here that I can have horizontal or vertical zoom. You can see little things like this little blip in here. Those are really to be got rid of. So I think this track,
Feel it's the bride.
yeah, it's just the end of my vocal. So really what I should be doing is just cutting those vocals and then just cutting it slightly before coming back in again. There we go. That just cleans it up even more. So it's quite a good thing that I haven't really sort of taken a huge amount of care here, because you can see the processes by which you need to sort of, you know, really do need to look at things and to make sure it's all going to work. Now, the banjo bit, that sort of analog synthy sort of lead line, you can see that it comes in straight away here, because I actually chopped it. I had a little sort of practice to find my note. But you could put a fade on that, which just makes it a little bit easier, a bit sort of more gentle coming in. Which is essentially what I want anyway. The next one was okay, and the next one, yeah, that was a bit abrupt as well. So what you can do is you can either see if there's anything behind it, Not really. Maybe if I brought it in a beat early with a fade, it might be a nice sort of, just go and have a listen to that in context, see if we can hear that.
Keeps you strong.
That's all right. The thing is, all of this is so subjective. You can do things, and people are so, oh no, you're not doing that right, or you're doing that all wrong. That's deeply unhelpful and actually not true anyway. There are things that you need to sort of, you need to sort out, like cutting all your bass on channels that don't have bass on, because you end up with this sort of rumbly effect. You're thinking, well, what is that noise? Why can I hear that? So, especially if you're using a microphone or a guitar amps throw out a lot of bass end, especially when they're driven. There was just one thing I noticed here, a little sort of blip there. Yeah, I don't want that. I can just get rid of that. So, yeah, when guitar amps are driven, there's an awful lot of bass end that comes out of them, partly because the power amplifier is no longer able to essentially control the speaker to bring it backwards and forwards, and that's the issue you get there. Now, the drum kit here, somebody else said, oh, I pity the drums weren't in context. Well, I did have the program, and my drumming isn't up to this, and actually I'd be just sat there for ages trying to get it to sound really good. So what I've got is I've got my my Gretsch kit that I sampled, and essentially you've got the main sort of bare bones sort of kick and snare and hi-hats. Complete with their ambience. If you see my drum kit video, you'll see how I basically made all those drum sounds. So there we go. There is a sort of an overview to sort of a little bit of mixing. Now, if I just go to the end and play my entire mix back. Now on my master here, I've got headroom of around about, well, it says 1.7 decibels there. If you're going to take this to a mastering facility, which is where we should all take our tunes, if we're really happy with them and you're happy with the mix, to make it sound really good, you've got to take it to somebody who really understands lots of different genres and also understands what you want. So what I've actually put in here is what's called a multi-band compressor. Now what that is, if I'll just switch it on, I'll just double click on it. It's a way of essentially compressing different areas of your frequency band, and I always do it to my mid-range a bit more, because I find the mid-range a little bit deficient, especially if you're dealing with lots of bass and then lots of top end. Lots of people sort of forget about the mids. So if I just play this back with the thing in bypass and then active. So this is bypassed.
Right or wrong, when you're feeling that, you know the way to turn. Either way.
And that's with the multi-band compressor, so it's lifted the output level. Now what I tend to do with that is to stick a limiter on afterwards, which just essentially just smooths off your sort of peaks. So I'll bring it back up to 0 on the meter.
Still get burned. It's the pride that makes you feel that you belong. It's the pride.
Now your ears are the ultimate judge of what your eyes see. If you're getting more than 6, maybe 5 or 6 dB of limiting, you're gonna sort of hear it start to pump a bit. So if I tried to do that,
but it keeps you strong.
And it's just a row. So what I've done is I've literally just control the limiter so that it just rounds off the very end, so 3 or 4 dB, as you can see on the display here. For some reason my backing vocals are a little bit lower there. I'm just going to bring them back up. That's that's a bit better. Now, when you're mixing, try to avoid doing it without the output compressors on, because you actually get a false impression of what's going on in your mix. So ideally, if you have your master quite low and your speakers up quite, higher to compensate, it means that you're getting a really good mix of your instruments, and then at the end you can start to tinker with the overall mix, whether it be a master EQ or the multiband compression or the limiter or whatever it is. So when you come to essentially bouncing this, always try and allow 1/4 of a second before it begins. So I was kind of like this, just so that you catch the very beginning. Now this is from the days of CD players where things would essentially not read the first bit, and you really don't want that. At the end, leave 4 seconds. Kind of there. It means that when you put it on iTunes, you've got that little gap afterwards. So there is a little bit of an overview. Please feel free to put questions in the comments box below, and do subscribe to my channel. I've got lots and lots of other things that I'm going to be doing, and also lots of things on the channel about mixing and about playing and about gear demos, that sort of thing.